throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown. Touchdown, Carolina. The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog podcast, coming at you here on a Friday night, the final Friday night of the regular season in college football. There are plenty of crazy games going on right now. Georgia Tech just going up right now on Georgia by 2 possessions out in Athens. And it's just the start of what is going to be an amazing rivalry weekend in the world of college football. And we're here to talk about maybe, and I've said this for years, maybe the most underrated rivalry in the sport of college football. It's one that usually ends up landing on a pretty big network. This year, with the two teams struggling a little bit, Carolina comes in 6-5, State comes in at 5-6. It's not where it has been in the last few years, but still, when you talk about the disdain that the fan bases have for each other, the disdain that at least one side of the rivalry, the players and coaches seem to have for one another, definitely it's up there with some of the best, I think, in all of college football. But we're here to preview what will be the 114th meeting between the two sides as Carolina looks to get to 7-5 on the season, and most importantly, close out the Mack Brown era, the second Mack Brown era, with a victory. So we're going to tell you all about the NC State Wolfpack. We'll dive into our keys to the game. We'll tell you about the biggest Tar Heel storylines, and we'll leave here giving you our predictions for what we expect tomorrow afternoon in Kenan Stadium. But let's start, first of all, by, just talking about this rivalry and where things are at currently. As I mentioned, 114th meeting all time between Carolina and NC State. The Tar Heels lead the series 68-39-6, and the Tar Heels have lost the last 3 in the series. When it comes to here recently and the issues that Carolina has had, I think really it's very simple, and we've talked about this each of the last 3 years, really each of the last 2, but it really starts and ends with the fact that NC State values this game more than Carolina has. I don't know why, because to me, it's so obvious that this is easily your biggest rival. This is clearly the team that hates you the most. I think Duke, definitely there is some hatred there, but really that rivalry is more on the basketball side of things where you see the true vitriol. And even that, I think last year, NC State took a step towards potentially coming closer to Carolina on the basketball side of things of being their biggest rival. So I think one of the big things that Carolina is going to need in this game is they are going to need to play with a level of hatred for the team on the other side that they just haven't had in the past 3 years. I think if you don't have that, it's really hard to see Carolina winning, because we know that the team on the other side hates Carolina as much as anything else in their lives. And a lot of that is because of their head coach.
Yeah, and I think that what stinks is that this has been the same rhetoric across the last three tenured football coaches for Carolina. You look at Butch Davis, never beat NC State. And some of those state teams with Russell Wilson were good, but there were, to the back end of his career, his time at Carolina was good, and he failed to beat them. You look at Larry Fedora, a very up and down record against NC State, where the highs were very high, but the lows were very low. And that's kind of the same feeling now you have with Mac Brown. He came back, understood the importance of the rivalry, getting Carolina back to just a level playing ground with the Wolfpack. We win the first 2 games in blowout, dominant fashion. The first year was to get bowl eligible in their building. But since then, it hasn't been the same. And Carolina has either lost in embarrassing fashion, blowing a 9-point lead in 2 minutes, or the last 2 years just in a beatdown. So, you would like to think that this game would bring out the best, or they would bring out the most emotion that you play with. Has not been the case for this team. They usually fail to meet the moment, and that's why they've been beaten pretty soundly the last couple of years by a lesser talented Wolfpack team.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year you probably could have debated the final part there, because I do think that NC State team was one of the more talented ones that we've seen. But coming into this game, I mean, you're clear. To me, you are the more talented team. This is a team that has not even remotely lived up to expectations. And they gave you fuel last year with what they said in the post game in their locker room that ended up getting leaked. And what you heard from Peyton Wilson in his post game interview. The thing is that should be on every wall in the Carolina locker room. It should be in the tunnels. All that stuff should be posted. They should have had that handed to them every day before practice, that this is what they said about you last year. Do I think that happened? Probably not, because it seemed like when Mac Brown addressed it earlier in the week that he really had put it behind him and wasn't really worried about that. That's concerning to me. And I'm hoping that the players remember a lot of what was said about them last year, because that should be all the fuel that you need to perform in this game. You also have the added fuel of this being Mac Brown's last game. He was, of course, fired, or tentatively fired, earlier in the week. This will be his final game. He will not coach in the bowl game. Bubba pretty much had to come out and confirm that, which I don't understand. People are shocked by that. Why would he coach in the bowl game? Like, if you're getting fired, there's a new coach that's going to come in and take over the program and put together a recruiting class, start recruiting in the transfer portal. That would make absolutely no sense to then have Mac Brown coach a bowl game when the new coach should be the one coming in, running the practices and doing all that kind of stuff. So that shouldn't really shock anybody, to be honest. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Tar Heels storylines for this game. But let's take a look at NC State. What does the team bring to the table that you are facing in this game? And look, this is, as I said, an extremely disappointing year for them. This is a team that came in preseason ranked top 15, and they are 5-6 on the season, 2-5 in conference play. Their offense, solid, but probably not where they thought it was going to be. Now, of course, you had the injury to Grayson McCall earlier in the year where he suffers a concussion. He decides that he is going to medically retire from football, a move that I think makes a lot of sense for him, especially because he had multiple concussions. That one in particular, incredibly scary. And still, someone, even with the rivalry, that of course we send our thoughts and prayers to, because He has, just had so many issues, especially with concussions throughout his football career. And so since then, the offense has slowly been sort of taking off as the year has gone along. They average 28.6 points per game, 365.6 yards of total offense, 232.0 passing yards, and 133.6 rushing yards. Biggest gem that they found this season has been their quarterback. CJ Bailey, true freshman, looks like he is going to be what they need moving forward, getting them back to some better quarterback play that they have been used to in years past. Now, of course, you're going to have to hang on to him because there could be some bigger schools that come after him in the NIL and transfer portal era. But this is a guy that can certainly hurt Carolina if they're not careful in this game. Not only through the air, he is one of their better rushing threats. This is a team that went into the portal in the offseason, got a guy in Jordan Waters out of Duke that looked like one of the best running backs in the conference a year ago. And since he's gotten to NC State, it just hasn't really clicked. He's a guy that performed really well in the first game of the season and has kind of disappeared since then. That means that they've used a guy like Kendrick Raphael in their backfield, as well as Dalen Hollywood Smothers, a transfer from from Oklahoma, who came to Oklahoma from Vance High School or Chambers High School now in Charlotte. So a lot of that, you'll notice that a lot throughout their roster, especially on the offensive side, that they've got guys that have transferred from bigger schools and have come back to their home state to try to succeed. Speaking of guys that had a great start to the year in the first game of the year and really haven't done a whole lot since, that's Kevin Concepcion, their leading wide receiver, a guy that most people thought was the best receiver in the ACC coming into the season. This year, it really just hasn't clicked for him. He had that big first game, scored 3 touchdowns in that game. He's only found the end zone twice since then, and it's been a pretty rough year overall for him. So this is a game that he's going to hope to shine in as well, just like he did a year ago. Carolina certainly has to be aware of him. Definitely have to be aware of Justin Joe Lee, the athletic tight end as well. Leads the team in receiving yards at 576. He's averaging 15.6 yards per catch, so an explosive threat for them at the tight end spot. And then, a couple other guys that are contributing there as well. Only other receiver that's over 300 yards is Noah Rogers, a guy that Tar Heel fans should be very familiar with. The Tar Heels recruited him hard out of high school. He, of course, went to Ohio State and then transferred back in-state. I think for him, he's only got 1 touchdown so far this season. You go to their offensive line, and this is probably the most shocking thing about them, is that this has always been a team on the offensive line that has been really good. You look at all the guys that they have put into the NFL ranks, but this group, I don't know how many of these guys are going to honestly be ending up at the NFL level. Not only are they allowing a decent amount of pressure, all but one of the guys that starts for them up front has allowed double-digit pressures on their quarterback so far this year, but they have also really struggled in the run game. This is a team that is in the top 10 in the country for the most tackles for loss allowed so far this season. So while they haven't allowed a ton of sacks, they don't rank too high in that category. The tackles for loss have been a big issue for them, and that's something that Carolina is going to have to take advantage. So this is an offense. We heard so much about them coming into the season, about how this offense was going to be one of the best that they ever have. And so far this year, it hasn't really panned out like that.
No, and it's from the word go. I watched their entire opener against Western Carolina, and you just thought it was a team going through week 1 struggles, just trying to find its rhythm, trying to figure out who they were going to be, which play calls worked, which play calls didn't. Grayson McCall looked hurt from the word go, and this was just an offense that has never found itself. But with that being said, Carolina needs to be prepared because they don't lack talent. And it does appear that when they've had these types of years where it hasn't all come together, it has come together in the game that means the most to them. And they're able to get their skill position guys the football. So, and Robert and I very well could be coordinating for his job going into next season.
Yep.
And if he wants to be back with the program, then, he knows putting up a big performance against Carolina goes a long way. And so I think the task is going to be on Jeff Collins and this defense responding after the disappointment last week.
Yep.
and not looking at the stats that NC State has or hasn't put up and think about them one way or another. This is still a group that can move the football. This is still a group that can put points up on you. And Carolina needs to be prepared with the best defensive game plan so far this season, or they could find themselves putting up a performance like we saw last week at Boston College.
Yeah, both sides of the ball, I think that's really good advice. Honestly, plan for the team that was preseason top 15 and act like this is one of the better teams in the country that you have to be prepared for, because there is a chance that they could play like that team in this game because of how much it means to them. But, look, we're looking at the stats here on this side of things because it certainly hasn't been the year that they've hoped for. And that's the same thing on the defensive side of the ball. It's been a long time since I've seen an NC State defense that has struggled this much. This is a team allowing 30.5 points per game, 376.4 yards of total offense, 238.0 passing yards, and 138.4 rushing yards. Again, strength of this unit, as it always seems to be, is this defensive front. They have created a lot of tackles for loss, but at times they've struggled to get to the quarterback this year. Davin Vann, their edge rusher, guy who was spectacular a year ago, hasn't necessarily been the same type of player this year, and he's going to come into this game banged up. Now, Dave Doran said after he exited the game early against Georgia Tech and didn't return, Doran said during this week that he is expecting for him to play in this game. That's a guy that wreaked havoc on Carolina last year, and they need to make sure that he doesn't do the same again this year. The interior of the line really grading out well, according to Pro Football Focus. You look at the top players on this NC State defense, according to Pro Football Focus, and the guys that have graded out the best so far this season. 3 of their top 5 are along the defensive front and play significant reps for them. So Carolina's got to be prepared once again for a defensive line group that is going to test that offensive line that right now comes into this game lacking confidence again. So this is going to be a massive test for them on Saturday. You look at the back half of this defense, that's where maybe things, aren't where they were expected to be this season. First of all, you go into the secondary. Aiden White, who came in, a lot of people thought probably the best corner in this conference. He has really struggled this year, giving up over 400 yards receiving on the outside. And he's a guy that a lot of NC State fans have sort of turned on. So this is a guy that, if Carolina can exploit him, that would be great. The thing is that, Carolina is going to have to navigate potentially some injuries at the wide receiver position that can make that more difficult. We'll tell you about that coming up when we talk about the storylines around Carolina. But you look at the middle of the field, this is another area where NC State has struggled against the pass, especially their linebacker. Sean Brown has been picked on so far this year. He's a guy that, he has high tackle numbers, but he has missed a lot of tackles, and he's been a liability in coverage. The safeties have been picked on a little bit as well. So that's certainly something that Carolina will look to take advantage of in this game. Bishop Fitzgerald, who is one of their starters at safety, he's allowed 4 touchdowns already so far this year. Could be an area that Carolina looks to go in this game. Their linebacking core as a whole, you have 3 guys that have played the majority of the snaps there. Sean Brown, as I mentioned, Devon Beatty, and Kamal Bonner. all of these guys have missed at least 10 tackles so far this year. So just like with Carolina, tackling has been a big issue throughout the year for this NC State squad. So, I mean, when you look at this defense, this isn't what we're used to talking about when we talk about a Tony Gibson-led defense. But again, I think it's very similar to what we talked about on the offensive side. The numbers might not be great, but you need to prepare as if this is a really, really good defensive unit, because you don't want to get caught off guard by a guy that's as good as Tony Gibson is as a defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think for them, they really struggled to recover, I think, from a mental standpoint after what happened the second week of the year against Tennessee and Charlotte. And I think it's for the whole program, because it felt like they'd been built to a point where they were ready for that moment. They were ready to compete. They were ready to go toe-to-toe with a playoff-type contender in Tennessee, and that was just not the case. They were not competitive, and we know that they've lost guys in that front seven over the years, but Tony Gibson had developed the knack of just being able to really replace those guys and keep that state defense competitive and make it among one of the best units in all of college football. That hasn't necessarily been the case this year. But they will look at a game plan that Boston College put together and try to replicate that, and really see, can they take Jacoby Criswell out of rhythm? How can they limit the hurt that Amarian Hampton is going to do on their defense? I think that's what makes Gibson one of the better coordinators in the country. Is I think he's always been able to adapt pretty well to the talent. That maybe hasn't been the case this year, but make no mistake, this guy knows how to get that defense ready to go for Carolina, and he'll know he'll have them ready to play with their hair on fire and with the reckless abandon that we've seen the last couple of years, where they've really gotten the better of Carolina on that side of the football. So I think it was the worst time for the year for the Heels to put up the type of tape they put up last week on Boston College offensively, because Tony Gibson and that defensive staff has watched that tape endlessly to see what can they do to replicate the same success Boston College had a week ago.
When you talk about the special teams unit for NC State, in solid shape, as they always seem to be, maybe not as dominant as they've been in years past. Caden Noonkester is their punter, having a really solid year, averaging 44.3 yards per punt. But then you've got their kicker, Kanoa Vincent, who is struggling so far this year on field goals longer than 40 yards. He's missed 5, all but one of those have come from beyond 40 yards. So not as much range as some of the previous kickers that we've seen come through NC State. Both return games in good shape. Carolina has to be careful with the explosive kick returner, Donovan Kaufman, who's averaging over 37 yards per return this season. Carolina faced some good returners early in the year and did a good job of making sure those guys did not hurt them. Let's move on to the Tar Heel storylines for this game. And the first one, you have to know where we're going with this one. Man, this is Mack Brown's final game. I would be absolutely stunned. There have been some people that have suggested a school like Charlotte go after him. Guys, this is it. This is Mack Brown going off into retirement, basically being forced into retirement by Carolina. We talked at length the other night about the decision, about how Bubba Cunningham went about it, which, by the way, we have received news since then that basically this was a move that, as we thought, was done from 5,000 miles away, which is still just an even worse look than we could have possibly thought for Bubba Cunningham. And now I think the big question coming into this game is, what is going to be the motivation of Mack Brown? What is going to be the motivation of these players? Because it can really go one of two ways. Either Mack Brown and these players are going to prepare their tails off, and this is going to be one of the best games that we've seen Carolina play in the Mack Brown 2.0 era, or they're going to mail it in and try to make a statement to the athletic department and this could be one of the ugliest games that we have ever seen. I'll be interested. I think we'll be able to tell pretty early on in the game what's going to happen. But this is a very, very weird spot, I think, for Carolina to be going into, and a lot of Carolina fans to be going into as well, because I think we all want to believe that this is going to be a game where they're going to lay it all out on the line and they're going to play hard. But I got to tell you, I don't think that's a guarantee, especially with how everything was handled.
Yeah, I think this might be the biggest unknown in the history of the program. Because I'd love to think that this team comes out and plays pissed off, and they have the back of their coach and they want to take it to their rival. We wouldn't be here if they would have played last week. Like, if you're not down 41-7 in the fourth quarter against Boston College, we're not at the situation that we're at right now, and that's just a simple truth.
Yep.
If Carolina wins the game, Mac Brown doesn't get fired on Tuesday.
Even if they don't get blown out like that, I think he probably maybe he's not secure, but I think they would have at least waited until this week to make the decision.
So, and I think you go back and you look at teams that are playing in the final game for their head coach, whether it was known before or afterhand, there's not a clear, definite, like, they always win, they always lose. The results are mixed. It's just going to be an odd feeling because you fired a guy that loves this place as much as you want someone to love this place, and did a lot of good for this place. But, we deemed that it wasn't good enough, but yet we didn't have the class or the respect that he had earned to do this in person. And so it's just, I don't know what to expect. I would love to. I always thought in my head that when Mac Brown's final home game in Kenan Stadium came, it would be a celebration. It would be a day where we would really just get to celebrate the man for what he did on the field, giving us some of the best football teams of all time, and off the field, just a guy that did everything with class and dignity. And that's not the case. We're not gonna have the send off that we wanted him to have. How do you honor him? How do you honor a guy that you fired? I don't quite know how you do that. So, but I think we'll know. I think we'll know first drive on both sides of the ball. If Carolina is there emotionally, if they're there mentally, or if all the stuff going on off the field just exhausted them and they just lay down and get beaten down by the Wolfpack.
Yeah, and the thing that I would say is, how do you honor him? I would say the thing to do for Tar Heel fans, especially that are in the stadium, is to do your best to honor him. Whenever you see him walk onto the field in pregame warmups, make it known. Cheer. Say thank you if you're close enough to the tunnel, whatever. Make this guy feel loved. Because, yes, there were some of us, and I was included in that thought it was time to move on. There is nobody in this fan base that thinks that Mac Brown deserved to go out the way that he's going to go out. To be fired from by your athletic director who's in Hawaii to watch the basketball program and didn't even have the decency to wait and tell you in person that they were letting you go, despite everything that you did. And really, I mean, building this program into one that people were able to look at and say was a sleeping giant. Because without him, that Carolina doesn't have that moniker. Maybe they still do because of what happened during the Bill Dooley and Dick Crum eras. But you got to think, without Mac Brown, I mean, we could be talking about an unbelievable extended period of time, almost 40 years of just complete mediocrity. So I think that Tar Heel fans, let's do our best to make Mac Brown feel that we are we support him, that we believe that he is the greatest coach that has ever coached this program, and that we believe that a guy that is in the Hall of Fame, that has won a national championship, deserves to be honored on his way out the door. That's the thing that I want Tar Heel fans to do in this game. No matter how you feel about Mack Brown, I mean, no matter how you felt about him throughout this season or the last couple of years, this is a man that deserves to be honored. So that's the thing that I think is most important when it comes to this game. Now let's talk about get back on the field and talk about really both sides of the ball. We'll start with the offense, because this group, they got no choice but to rebound from the worst showing of the Mack Brown era. This was a complete disaster. The 2 touchdowns that they did score were against Boston College second stringers. And before that, Carolina had 103 yards of total offense and had failed to score a touchdown in 54 minutes of game action. This needs to be a much, much better performance. And really, it starts with the play caller on that side of the ball. The fact that you ran the ball 11 times with Amari and Hampton should be a fireable offense. And with Mack Brown heading out, there's a good chance that it is. And Chip Lindsey, he can look in the mirror at himself and point to him as part of the reason why Mack Brown was let go earlier this week, because that offensive performance was as pathetic as it gets. So you need him to be better at setting up this game plan, using the run more in this game, but also you need Jacoby Criswell to recover from what was an extremely rough performance against Boston College, something that will not be easy, with there being a shot that J.J. Jones and Nate McCullum possibly don't play in this game.
Yeah, the best way to put together a game plan that works is not to be down 17-0 and have to start chasing points. This offense isn't built to do that. And for the most part, Carolina had done a really good job outside of the James Madison game, being able to run their offense as they saw fit and being able to run the ball and set up play action pass and put Jacoby Criswell in situations to be successful. Wasn't the case last week. I thought Carolina struggled to get any push up front for Amari and Hampton to begin with, and it just culminated in the worst offensive performance of the year and one of the worst offensive performances we've seen in the last 15 years of this program. And so, the onus is on them to bounce back hopefully they had a great week of practice. Mm-hmm. Hopefully they're motivated to put last week behind them. And really the task is trying to find the answer to this Wolfpack defense, because the last 2 years they beat you down and they were they wore you down. Like they were the more physical unit. They were the more aggressive unit. And they made life a living hell for Drake May. If Carolina allows State's defensive line to have the same sort of impact tomorrow after they've had the last 2 years, it's going to be a long day, because Jacoby Criswell was not good enough to overcome that stuff, and neither was Drake May in the 2 games. We saw Drake May get affected by their pass rush, and it's a big reason why Carolina lost both those games. So be interested to see how they bounce back. I would expect a lot of touches for Amari and Hampton. This will the last time we'll see him in a Tar Heel uniform. But the best way for Chip Lindsey to call his offense as he sees fit, which as of last week was a top 20 offense in college football, is not to be down 3 possessions in the blink of an eye.
Well, I mean, it helps on those early possessions too, where you actually run the football, not try to come out and exploit a weakness with these defenses, which he's attempted to do each of the last 2 weeks. And I'm scared that he's going to get tempted to do it again, because the weakness of this Wolfpack defense has been their secondary. It doesn't matter. Wake Forest showed you that it doesn't matter. You need to run the football with Amari and Hampton, and you need to be stubborn about it. If he doesn't have 35 touches in this game, then you just aren't game planning correctly. So to me, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This should be Mac Brown telling him either you run the ball with Amari and Hampton or you will not work in college football ever again. I will tell people, do not hire this man because he doesn't know what he's doing. So hopefully that is something that is being conveyed to him, that you need, again, you have the second best running back in the country behind a guy that's probably going to win the Heisman Trophy, especially if he ends up breaking Barry Sanders' record somehow in the Mountain West Championship game. Use him and use him often in this game. You go to the defensive side of the ball, and to me, I think this is really simple. Last week, they got bullied up front, and that allowed Boston College to be able to run the ball successfully, which set up their passing game. This is a situation where NC State's going to want to run the football. We saw them do it incredibly successfully last year. Don't be shocked if they are putting Kevin Concepcion in the backfield. Carolina's got to find a way to shed blocks up front and make plays early on in the game. Set a tone defensively, because if you're able to do that, then I think Carolina has a chance to be successful. It's what they did in the previous 3 games. And that's what's frustrating. We know this group is capable of doing that. But last week, you got bullied and pushed around by an offensive line that had some good moments this season, but also had really struggled at times. This is a group that's very similar to that. And I mean, if you look at the way that they grade out, they've arguably been even worse than that. They've allowed a ton of tackles for loss. So the opportunity should be there for Carolina. I think it's about shedding those tackles or blocks up front to make tackles. And then it's actually finishing plays when you can get pressure on the quarterback. I think it really is all about what that defensive line unit does, because that really makes this defense go, as we saw in the previous 3 weeks.
Yeah, it starts and ends with Kamen Rucker, Bo Atkinson, Des Evans living in the backfield and passing plays, and then Travis Shaw, Javari Ritzy making plays in the run game. And when you saw that the last 3 weeks, you saw what Jeff Collinson's defense was capable of being, which, no, wasn't a top 10 defense, no, but it was a defense that did what it was supposed to do to give yourself a chance to win week in, week out. And last week, they just got ran all over, and Bill O'Brien was really able to exploit them in ways that we did not see coming. I think part of that is you credit him as a play caller. You credit that NFL eye where maybe he saw a thing or two on tape that some coordinators haven't seen, and he was able to exploit that. Hopefully Robert Anaya does not have the same success, but if we don't hear Kamen Rucker's name, Travis Shaw's name early and often in this ball game, it's going to be a sign that Carolina is losing the battle up front. They're getting pushed around, and that's not going to be a good recipe, because State will be able to just methodically, wear them down. And at some point, the defense is going to break, as we saw last week. So, hopefully this is a group that plays pissed off, that they're as motivated as any group to play well for their head coach one final time, because Carolina needs to – they may not need to win the battle in the trenches, but they got to hold their own in the battle of the trenches to give themselves a chance. Last couple of years, it's been non-competitive. Yep. There was no denying who the better team was up front. I don't know if Carolina has to necessarily be night and day the best team, but that question has to be up for debate, and it starts with that defensive line.
Oh, I mean, there's no denying it. Last year was probably the worst game in the trenches I have ever seen from Carolina, especially that the Tar Heel offensive line matched up with that defensive line. That was, I mean, non-competitive is being nice. That was just a live murder on television. And it was the whole night. There was never any sort of pushback from Carolina. And look, we'll talk about that here in just a second in our keys to the game. That'll come up. But, I mean, you talked about playing pissed off, playing motivated. Man, That's the last thing. Carolina, the last storyline for this game is Carolina's got to stop getting pushed around by this team. It's time to stop rolling over and just letting NC State do whatever they want. Again, I said it. What they said about you last year should piss you off to no end. Because I'm going to tell you right now, it pissed us off as fans. We were incredibly pissed that they were talking about our players like that. So if the fans are mad, you guys as players should be incredibly mad as well. And I hope that's the mindset that these guys take into this game. If you're not playing for this team because you feel like your head coach has been done wrong, man, play for yourselves, because this group has no respect for you. And they're going to show it probably multiple times throughout the game tomorrow. That should get you motivated, and you should want to come out and destroy this team in every aspect. And I hope that's the mindset that Carolina takes into this game, because as we've said, that's the mindset that you have to take when it comes to this team. There's no respect with this team. We don't respect them. We may respect Duke as a rival. We may respect Wake as a rival. With this team, this fan base, we don't respect anything about them, because they are, as we've always said, they are beneath us. And you need to think that coming into this game and show them that that's what they are.
Well, the most disappointing thing about what Dave Doran said last year may not have been the fact that it was an accurate assessment of what Carolina football was and is. It was more the fact that a third of those kids, 2/3 of the kids that he said that about, he recruited and would die to have in his program, because from a talent perspective, they're more gifted than the farm boys that he gets to come into his program. And so that's the most disappointing thing, was that in that clip, he showed you the type of man that he was and the type of man that he is, which is wild for a guy that has still yet to produce a double-digit win season at the power conference level. And so, Mac Brown, I think, coming out and say that was forgotten about, that's behind them. A coach has to say that. You just don't come out there and say, yeah, you can't say publicly, yeah, we're still thinking about what he said a year ago. But what's that message behind closed doors? Because I would play that for them in every meeting. I would play that for them in practice. And I would play that for them if a guy had a bad rep. I would just play that for them.
I said it. The quotes would be in their lockers sitting there. It would be in the tunnel for them, right next to Keep Swinging and Tylee Strong. You would see that next to them. And I would tell them, this is what you live by in this game. This is what they think of you. They think you're better. They're better than you are. And we all know that certainly ain't true. It's the other way around. So let's go prove it.
Well, I mean, the problem is the results on the field would suggest otherwise. But so yeah, we're going to find out if this team has some fight back, if this team has some pushback. So yeah, it's what makes this weekend fun, because you can clearly throw out the record books, and a team that is playing motivated can beat a much more talented team, or a team that should win the game. And hopefully that's something we're talking about with Carolina when we recap this thing on Monday.
All right, let's get to the keys to the game for this game against NC State. Number one is bring the intensity and the toughness for Mac Brown. You haven't shown it consistently throughout his tenure here the second time around. And for some of you guys, look, you haven't been here clearly the entire time, but the last 3 years, it just has not been brought to the table. That needs to change in this game. Last week, toughness was the thing that was talked about by this coaching staff the entire week, and it didn't show up on Saturday. This week, we haven't really heard a lot of talk about that. Now, who knows? It might have been brought up, and all that's kind of been left behind us now with the news that came out on Tuesday. But this is a game that you need to bring that to. And where it needs to show up most is in the trenches, because out of every area on the team, That's the area where it failed to show up the most, especially the last 2 years. This team needs to come out fired up. They need to come out angry. And you need these guys who have shown, especially on the defensive side of the ball, they have shown that the toughness is there. The offensive line, in the running game, they have shown that the toughness is there throughout this season. But now this is the game where you got to lay it all on the line and leave it all out there, because guess what? All those games before this game don't mean anything. This is the only game that it should matter, and you need to play like it.
Yeah, you would like to think that the emotions of this rivalry brings out the best in your players and brings out a side of them that maybe you don't see every time on the field because you don't feel about that opponent the way that you should feel about this opponent. And so I think as awkward as I think tomorrow's going to be, I think this is a fan base that's desperate to beat NC State. I think you'll be able to feel that buzz, that energy leading up to kickoff. It might be a nervous energy because of this being Mac Brown's final game, but I think, once the game settles in, this is going to be a fan base that wants to beat them because it's not a good feeling losing to these guys, and you got to feed off of that and use every little technical advantage to your advantage to play your best, because this is not going to be an easy game. It's not going to be I don't think it's going to be a blowout. I think it's going to be whichever is the toughest team standing. I think it's going to be the one that wins the ball game, and Carolina's got to show up and be ready for war for 3.5 hours. And it starts from the opening kick till the final whistle, being able to sit there and go blow to blow for a team that needs to beat you to make a bowl game, but also needs to beat you to salvage what has been the biggest lost season in the history of the program.
And if you needed any more motivation for this game, their starting quarterback, who's a true freshman that didn't even play in this rivalry the last 3 years that they've beaten you, he said that we didn't really care about the game that we played last week against Georgia Tech because we know that we're winning next week. So there was no need to actually come out and win this game against the Yellow Jackets. That should just add to the motivation for this game. The second key to this game is, as the great Sandra Bullock once said while playing Leanne Toohey in the movie The Blind Side, because we have since learned that some of that stuff may be falsified, so maybe this didn't actually happen. Run the damn ball. That's the message that we have been screaming for the last 2 weeks. And this week, it's just going to continue. You lean on your running game. 11 touches for Amarian Hampton is a joke. That should be in the first quarter. This dude is the heart and soul of this team. And if you needed any more proof that that is the case, just look at last week. Your quarterback cannot function without leaning on his run game to get things going. And I think that's what you got to do in this game. You need to run the ball right at him. There is not a team that has run the ball at NC State like you are going to be able to. There's a reason that Amarian Hampton has been as successful as he has been this year. Yes, you need your offensive line to show up, but we know that's the strength of this group, especially with the size of your offensive tackles. They're struggling in pass protection, so the easy way to mask some of those issues for the majority of the night is to run the ball at a successful level. But it starts with Chimp Lindsey actually having trust that his run game can carry him through this game, despite what the scouting report may tell you about this team.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate, I think as long as Carolina is managing time and possession and score, I think that he'll run the ball. I think if this is a situation that where you find yourself down 17-0 like you were a week ago, conventional wisdom now is going to tell you to run or to throw it. I don't think that's going to happen. And so I do think you'll see a heavy dose of Amarian Hampton because he is Carolina's best chance at winning this game. And I do think that whether they'll admit it or not, knowing that this is the last time that he'll play in front of Carolina fans, I think will also play into it as well for a chance for him to go out on a high note against Carolina's biggest rival. So I expect a bounce back performance from Chip Lindsey. I expect a bounce back performance from Amarian Hampton, because for Carolina to win this game, it's got to be a situation where Hampton touches the ball 25 plus times and racks up 150 plus yards of total offense in the run, in the pass game. We know that. I think the coaching staff knows that. And I think you'll see them bounce back in a big way.
Final key to the game is one that we haven't really brought up a whole lot this year, and it's probably an oversight, especially on my part. Carolina, there is a very, very evident trend, and I think it honestly became even more evident last week. Carolina has to win the turnover battle in this game, or else they're not going to win. In the 6 wins that Carolina has had this year, they are +7 in turnover margin. In the 5 losses, they are -7. We've seen when this team turns the ball over at a high rate, it is incredibly difficult for them to overcome it. So they have to take care of the ball, and they have to create turnovers. CJ Bailey is a guy that has had moments where he's looked really, really good, but he's also had moments where he's turned the ball over. Getting pressure on the quarterback will be important, and forcing him into mistakes, I think, is a big part of the recipe for Carolina to win this game. But it all starts on your side, where Jacoby Criswell has to take care of the football better if Carolina wants to have a chance to win.
Yeah, you look at Bailey. I think he's going to make some plays that will wow you.
Yep.
He'll make some plays to where there's nothing you can do about it. He's that type of athlete. But because of his youthfulness and his inexperience, he will put the ball in harm's way, which means Jeff Collins needs to be aggressive early and often to get him out of rhythm and see if he'll put the ball in a situation where you can get a turnover or two, get a short field, get a defensive score. Some of the things that this defense did in the 3-game winning streak. On the flip side, Jacoby Criswell just has to see the field better. It feels like, and it felt like last week, he was. I mean, the first pick he threw. I mean, you and I sitting in my room at my house at the same, watching the game together, said right away interception.
Yep.
Because we could tell from the TV side of things that he stared down his receiver. And if we're telling that on our at-home screen, and look, I've got a nice TV set up, but I mean, this isn't first class. But that could tell you that, well, what is Boston College seeing on the field, and what their coaching staff is seeing up in the press box watching the game film. So I think the best thing for him to do is for them to get multiple different receivers involved, because it feels like if he starts cooking with one guy, he just starts looking that way, and it's either all or nothing. You got to spread the ball around. You got to make them respect everybody on the field, and you got to do a good job using your eyes to look off defenders and go the other way. It's a rivalry game. Turnover battle is going to be important. I find it hard to believe if Carolina is -2 or worse in this game, they come away victorious.
And look, NC State's a team that's -5 in turnovers so far this year. So that's been one of their Achilles heels. You need to exploit it. Now it's time to get to our predictions for this game. 3:30, ACC Network in Kenan Stadium. What do you see happening, buddy?
Yeah, when we went through the schedule back during the year, I picked Carolina to lose the game. But I also had Carolina at 10-1, and I had State at 10-1 because I had NC State making the ACC title game.
What a fool.
Obviously, that's not on the line for either team. One team has already fired their head coach. Another, depending on what happens tomorrow, could hear enough from their fan base that they fire their coach. As I mentioned, I think this will be the oddest game in the history of this program. And I think it's going to create a unique energy around the game. The Tar Heels have the best player between either squad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Amarian Hampton. And we've seen this guy will Carolina to wins at different point during his Carolina career. He may have to will them to another one tomorrow. And I think he's up for the task. And I think that's the difference in the game, is that Carolina has the best player between either team. I think Hampton has a big day. I think this team responds in just a week full of adversity and a week full of distractions. And they beat NC State 24-23 to send Mac Brown off victorious one final time.
A low-scoring affair. Yeah, I think, honestly, we're wondering what this team comes out looking like. Are they going to be a team that is bought in to winning this game and sending their coach out with a victory? Or are they going to be vengeful and say, we're just going to go through the motions and show the athletic department that they made the wrong decision? I think this team's going to come out fired up and play for their coach one more time, because I think we know the man that Mac Brown is. I don't think that he's going to want to let these players down. I think the message to them is going to be, come out, find a way to win this game, and let's send him out with a final victory that will get him to 289 wins. And that's how you cap it off. I think you'll see a team that comes out motivated. I think for Chip Lindsey, man, this could be your future on the line here, because there is a next to 0% chance that he is probably retained with the new coaching staff. He doesn't really have any ties to any of the guys that we've looked at, as potential candidates, or that, the team may have primarily been in contact with. So I think this is going to be a game where he's trying to prove himself. And for this offense to have their best success, they need to run the football. I think they will. I think Amari and Hampton will touch the ball about 35 times in this game, the number that he should be at. And I think he'll be able to have success, because I trust that this offensive line can run block. That's the one thing I trust about this offensive line. I don't know how to feel about them in pass protection. Last week does not make me confident by any stretch, but we know that they can run block. And defensively, I think this group is going to be angry about what happened last week. This is a team in NC State that has not been a great running team the entire season. I think that Carolina will be able to potentially exploit that. That team that they faced last week was one of the best running teams in the country. So it makes a little bit of sense why they struggled. I think that group is going to come out motivated. And I think just as a whole, this team's going to be motivated by what was said about them last year. Because trust me, those people on the other side absolutely mean that. That's not game speak. That's not rivalry talk because it's a game. Oh, no, that's exactly how they feel about you. So it's time to show them that they are 100% wrong and make a statement. I think Carolina does that in this game. NC State's going to fight, man. We know they are, because this is going to be big. They have a chance to make a bowl game with this, with a victory in this game. This is their season. But I think in the end, Carolina does just enough on riding that high of trying to send Mac Brown out with a win. I think Carolina gets the victory in this one, 31-28 over the NC State Wolfpack. No matter what happens, we'll have you covered on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Plenty of stuff up there right now. We're going to, of course, have the preview for this game, and that's one that you're going to want to follow along with into tomorrow morning, because we are going to have updates, any of the latest stuff that we hear coming out about J.J. Jones, about Nate McCullum. Carolina could be without three of their top receivers for this game, with tight end Bryson Nesbitt already being declared that he will not be able to play in this game. So a lot to monitor on the injury front. So make sure that you are keeping an eye out on the preview that will be posted later tonight for all of the latest information on that. And of course, more in-depth information about the team that Carolina will face, the comparison of team stats for you guys to look at, as well as the keys to the game a little more in-depth, and the projected starting lineups, as well as the weather information for tomorrow's game if you're getting ready to head out to Kenan Stadium. Meanwhile, all of the stuff on the website about Mac Brown's firing, we have a list of candidates that I put out there, 15 names that I think Carolina should consider. And then we do have an update on the coaching search. Arthur Smith seeming to turn down any interest that Carolina would have in him. It's not clear if Carolina has reached out to him and officially offered him the job, but there has been apparently a conversation of them reaching out to him, and he has basically said that he is satisfied where he is at. So read that article on there. Also, 2 important members of the 2025 recruiting class for Carolina, they are taking visits elsewhere. Find out who that is and what Carolina is probably hoping to do with those guys as we approach the early signing day, which is December 4th. It's coming up very quickly, so that's the reason why hopefully Carolina will be moving quickly on getting their new coach in here. Any new updates that we have on that, even if it's during the game tomorrow, we will be sure to pass those along to you on the website at HeelToughBlog.com. Basketball side of things, oh man, what a freaking depressing week it was in Hawaii. Started out well. Carolina, went out there, played Hawaii. Wasn't the greatest performance, but they found a way to win. Then they completed an amazing comeback against Dayton. From that point on, it was pretty much a train wreck for Carolina. So read all about their trip out to Maui and what the issues are with this team that they're going to have to navigate for the rest of the year. You can find all that on HeelToughBlog.com. And, of course, if you're wanting to hear our reactions to what happened out in Maui, you can listen to the Four Corners podcast wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to it. We would also appreciate if you would do that for the Heel Tough Blog podcast, especially if you are someone that is a listener to this podcast. So that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the show. Want to thank Josh for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels and go to Hell State.